In 2018, one of China's elite armored brigades participated in a military exercise designed to test combat readiness against realistic opposition. The brigade was equipped with Type 99A tanks, China's most advanced main battle tanks, featuring 125mm guns, 1,500 horsepower engines, sophisticated fire control systems, and composite armor designed to compete with American M1 Abrams and Russian T-90S. Chinese state media had celebrated the Type 99A as proof that China's ground forces operated world-class equipment comparable to the best tanks fielded by any military. The brigade should have dominated. They had the newest, most capable tanks in the Chinese arsenal. They represented the elite of Chinese armored forces. They were facing opposition forces using older equipment in a scenario specifically designed to test how well the PLA could employ its most advanced hardware. They lost, badly. After the exercise, the brigade commanders gave unusually candid assessments explaining what went wrong. One commander admitted that they rushed the Type 99A too close to the front line, which did not optimize the use of the tank's combat capability. Another commander said they only studied capabilities of older tanks, but have not completely understood new ones. In short, they gave their elite troops China's most advanced tanks without teaching them how to use them effectively. We understood the old equipment, but we did not fully comprehend the new. We employed expensive, sophisticated vehicles using tactics designed for older, less capable tanks. And we lost to opponents who should not have beaten us. Today, we will examine why China's most advanced tank is operated by troops who do not know how to use it properly. What this reveals about the fundamental gap between building impressive hardware and developing the institutional knowledge to employ it effectively, and why 46 years without ground combat has left the PLA with zero practical experience that matters for modern armored warfare. By the end, you will understand that you can give soldiers advanced tanks, but you cannot give them decades of combat experience they never had. Let us start with what the Type 99A actually is and what China claims it can do, because understanding the capabilities reveals how significant the failure to use them properly is. The Type 99A is China's third-generation main battle tank, introduced in the early 2000s with continuous improvements culminating in the current variant. Approximately 1,300 have been built, according to various estimates, making it one of the larger fleets of modern tanks operated by any military. The specifications sound impressive. 125mm smoothbore gun capable of firing armor-piercing, fin-stabilized, discarding sabot rounds, anti-tank guided missiles, and high-explosive rounds. Composite armor with reactive armor tiles provides protection against both kinetic and chemical energy threats. A 1,500 horsepower engine provides respectable mobility. A sophisticated fire control system includes a laser rangefinder, thermal sights, and a ballistic computer. On paper, the Type 99A compares reasonably well to contemporary Western and Russian tanks. It is not clearly superior to M1 Abrams or Leopard 2A7, but it is in the same general capability class, a legitimate third-generation main battle tank with modern systems and competitive performance characteristics. Chinese state media portrays the Type 99A as evidence that China's ground forces have caught up to Western militaries in armored warfare capability. Propaganda videos show Type 99A tanks maneuvering in formation, firing accurately at range, and demonstrating mobility across varied terrain. The message is that China's tank forces are world-class and ready for modern combat. Then the 2018 exercise revealed that China's elite troops with these advanced tanks did not actually know how to use them effectively. The hardware was there. The knowledge was not. Now, let's examine what actually went wrong in the 2018 exercise, because the commander's explanations reveal fundamental training and doctrinal problems. The first commander's admission, "We rushed the Type 99A too close to the front line, which did not optimize the use of the tank's combat capability," reveals tactics designed for older tanks being applied to newer ones without understanding how capabilities changed. The Type 99A's advanced fire control system enables accurate engagement at longer ranges than older Chinese tanks. The 125mm gun with modern ammunition can defeat armor at distances exceeding 2,000 meters. The thermal sights allow detection and targeting in conditions where older tanks would be ineffective. These capabilities suggest employing Type 99As at standoff ranges where their superior sensors and firepower provide an advantage over less capable opponents. Instead, the brigade rushed tanks too close to the front line. Tactics appropriate for tanks with inferior sensors and fire control that must close to shorter ranges to achieve accurate fire. By bringing Type 99As close to frontline positions, they negated the range and sensor advantages the tanks provide, exposing them to threats unnecessarily and essentially employing expensive modern tanks as if they were older vehicles without those capabilities. This is not a minor tactical error. This is a fundamental misunderstanding of how the equipment works and what advantages it provides. It is like having a sniper rifle and using it for room clearing instead of long-range precision fire. Technically, the rifle works at close range, but you are not using it for what it is actually designed to do. The second commander said they only studied capabilities of older tanks, but had not completely understood the new ones. This admission says training and doctrine development did not keep pace with hardware acquisition. The People's Liberation Army bought and fielded 1,300 advanced tanks without ensuring the troops operating them actually understood how these tanks differed from previous equipment or how to employ them effectively. This suggests a systemic failure in how the People's Liberation Army approaches equipment modernization. Someone approved procurement of 1,300 Type 99A tanks, and someone authorized their deployment to frontline brigades. But apparently nobody ensured doctrine, tactics, and training were updated to match the new capabilities. The hardware procurement happened without a corresponding investment in the institutional knowledge needed to use it properly. We need to talk about why this happened, because understanding the root causes reveals broader problems in Chinese military development. China's last significant ground combat was 1979, the Sino-Vietnamese War. That is 46 years ago. 46 years without major ground combat operations means 2 entire generations of Chinese officers and soldiers have never experienced real armored warfare. They have conducted exercises, studied theory, and trained on ranges, but they have not fought actual enemies who shoot back, adapt tactics, and create the chaos and unpredictability that characterizes real combat. By contrast, the United States has conducted ground operations in Iraq in 1991, and from 2003 to 2011 in Afghanistan from 2001 to 2021, and in smaller operations in Kosovo, Syria, and elsewhere. American tank crews and officers have extensive combat experience employing armor in varied environments against different opponents. This experience teaches lessons that cannot be replicated in exercises. It shows how enemy forces actually respond to armor attacks, what tactics work against real opposition using real countermeasures, and how to adapt when situations do not match expectations. The People's Liberation Army has none of this. Its understanding of armored warfare comes from studying other militaries' experiences, conducting exercises against scripted opposition, and theoretical analysis. When officers in the People's Liberation Army design tactics and doctrine, they are working from secondhand knowledge rather than direct experience. This creates blind spots, assumptions about how things work that seem logical but do not match combat reality. The 2018 exercise exposed some of these blind spots. The brigade commanders thought they understood how to employ Type 99A tanks based on their experience with older tanks and theoretical study. In practice, they did not. Real opposition, even in an exercise, revealed gaps in their understanding that peacetime training had not identified. Without regular combat experience to validate and refine doctrine, these gaps accumulate. The People's Liberation Army does not know what it does not know because it has not been tested under conditions that expose these gaps definitively. Now let's examine the specific technical and operational problems with the Type 99A that combat experience would have identified and addressed. The Type 99A uses a carousel autoloader derived from Soviet tank designs, the same type of autoloader that Russian T-72 and T-90 tanks use. This system stores ammunition in a carousel beneath the turret, and it allows automatic loading without a dedicated human loader. It works efficiently when functioning properly, and it allows a smaller crew size, 3 crew members instead of 4, compared to Western tanks with manual loaders. But the carousel autoloader has a catastrophic vulnerability that Russian tanks demonstrated repeatedly in Ukraine. If the tank is penetrated and ammunition in the carousel ignites, the resulting explosion can blow the turret completely off the hull and kill all crew members instantly. Videos from Ukraine show dozens of destroyed Russian tanks with turrets blown meters away from the hull, the result of ammunition cooking off in carousel autoloaders. Western tanks like the M1 Abrams store ammunition in compartments separated from the crew by armored bulkheads with blowout panels designed to vent explosions away from the crew. If ammunition is hit and ignites, the panels blow outward and the crew survives, though the tank is likely destroyed and the explosion does not catastrophically separate the turret. The Type 99A uses a Soviet-derived carousel autoloader and so shares the same vulnerability as Russian tanks. If penetrated in the carousel, a catastrophic ammunition explosion is likely. Combat experience would have revealed this vulnerability and potentially driven redesign to address it. Without combat testing, the People's Liberation Army does not have direct evidence of how catastrophic this flaw is in actual warfare. Beyond ammunition storage, there is a broader question about armor effectiveness. The Type 99A's composite armor and reactive armor tiles look sophisticated, but actual performance against modern anti-tank weapons has not been tested in combat. Does the armor actually defeat modern tandem warhead anti-tank guided missiles? Will the reactive armor work reliably under combat conditions? How does the tank perform after taking non-penetrating hits that damage sensors or tracks? Western tanks have been tested extensively in combat. The M1 Abrams has fought in multiple conflicts, revealing both strengths and weaknesses that drove improvements. The Type 99A's armor has never faced real anti-tank weapons fired by determined enemies. The People's Liberation Army's confidence in their tank protection is theoretical rather than proven. Now let's talk about the cost factor that limits Type 99A deployment, because this creates additional operational problems. Assessments show that Type 99A tanks see less deployment than other tanks because they are expensive to operate. Fuel consumption, maintenance requirements, specialized ammunition, and spare parts all cost significantly more than older tanks. This economic reality means the People's Liberation Army cannot afford to use Type 99As as extensively as less expensive alternatives. Expensive and limited deployment shape how the force is organized. The result is clear. Type 99As are concentrated in elite units, while regular units continue operating older tanks. That creates a two-tier force structure where only select units have access to the best equipment. It also means most tank crews never train on Type 99As, limiting the overall force's proficiency with modern armor. Two-tier describes the divide. This has direct operational implications. In conflict, the People's Liberation Army cannot deploy only Type 99A equipped units. Commanders would have to employ mixed forces with varying capabilities, which creates logistics complications and tactical challenges. Coordinating operations between units with very different equipment is complex because tactics that work for Type 99As might not work for older tanks, and vice versa. Complexity increases risk in combat planning. Limited deployment also means limited training opportunities. If tanks are too expensive to operate frequently, crews cannot accumulate the extensive training hours needed to develop genuine proficiency. Tank warfare requires muscle memory and instinctive responses developed through repetitive training. When cost constraints limit training time, crews never develop the automatic reactions that separate competent operators from merely adequate ones. Limited training degrades performance. We can check external evaluations for a reality check. The U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency has assessed that a gap exists between the People's Liberation Army and the air forces of powerful nations when evaluating Chinese military capabilities across domains. While that statement specifically addresses air forces, the underlying assessment applies to ground forces as well. Modernized hardware alone does not substitute for decades of combat experience and institutional knowledge. That gap is not primarily hardware-based. The Type 99A tank is competitive with Western equipment on specifications, and Chinese armor can perform comparably in controlled testing. The real gap is experience, doctrine, training, and the accumulated knowledge of how to employ capabilities effectively under combat conditions. The 2018 exercise where a Type 99A equipped elite brigade lost is not an isolated incident. It is a data point confirming what outside analysts assess. The PLA can field impressive-looking hardware, but it has not yet developed the operational competence to use that hardware as effectively as militaries with extensive combat experience. Operational competence requires both machines and the trained crews, doctrine, and habits to use them well. This matters because in actual conflict, operational competence often decides outcomes more than raw hardware capabilities. A well-trained crew in an older tank can defeat a poorly trained crew in a newer tank through superior tactics, faster reactions, and better decision-making. The PLA's modernization has focused heavily on hardware, while apparently underinvesting in the training, doctrine development, and institutional knowledge required to maximize that hardware's effectiveness. So, what does all this mean for Chinese armored forces and their actual combat capability? First, it means building 1,300 advanced tanks does not automatically translate to having 1,300 combat-effective armor units. The hardware exists, but the knowledge, training, and doctrine needed to employ it effectively lag significantly behind. Until training and doctrine catch up to hardware capabilities, those tanks represent underutilized potential rather than realized combat power. Second, it reveals that 46 years without ground combat has created an experience gap that cannot be easily closed through exercises and theoretical study. The PLA does not know what it does not know because its forces have never been tested in the chaos of real combat that exposes gaps between theory and reality. Third, cost factors limiting Type 99A deployment create a two-tier force structure where only elite units have modern equipment, while regular forces operate older tanks. This complicates operations, limits overall force proficiency with modern systems, and creates capability gaps across the force. Fourth, even elite units, the ones supposedly best trained and equipped, struggle to employ advanced equipment effectively, which suggests broader institutional problems with how the PLA approaches modernization and training. Let us be clear about what this does not mean, because accuracy requires acknowledging what China has accomplished. This does not mean the Type 99A is a bad tank or that Chinese engineering is incompetent. The Type 99A is a legitimate third-generation main battle tank with competitive capabilities. China's ability to design and manufacture modern armor at scale is a genuine achievement. This does not mean PLA tank crews are individually incompetent or lack dedication. Chinese soldiers train hard and take their duties seriously. The issue is institutional, systemic problems with doctrine, training, and experience that affect even highly motivated, intelligent personnel. And this does not mean China cannot improve. Given time, more realistic training, updated doctrine, and potentially combat experience, hopefully limited to exercises rather than actual war, the PLA could close capability gaps and learn to employ their hardware more effectively. But it does mean that right now, China's most advanced tanks are operated by troops who have not fully understood the new vehicles, using tactics that did not optimize the tank's combat capability, and lacking the combat experience that teaches what actually works versus what only seems like it should work. So what is the bottom line on the Type 99A and what it reveals about the People's Liberation Army Armored Forces? China built approximately 1,300 Type 99A tanks, modern capable vehicles with specifications comparable to Western main battle tanks. On paper, this represents formidable armored capability. Chinese state media celebrates the Type 99A as evidence that China's ground forces are world-class. In 2018, an elite brigade equipped with Type 99A tanks lost a military exercise despite superior hardware. Brigade commanders gave unusually candid explanations. They rushed tanks to the front line using tactics designed for older equipment. They did not fully understand the new tank's capabilities, and they failed to optimize their employment. These admissions reveal that hardware procurement outpaced doctrine and training development. China bought and fielded advanced tanks without ensuring troops knew how to use them effectively. The result is expensive, sophisticated equipment employed suboptimally by crews who understand older systems better than newer ones. 46 years without ground combat means zero practical experience in modern armored warfare. People's Liberation Army officers design tactics based on theory and secondhand knowledge rather than combat experience. This creates blind spots and assumptions about how things work that seem logical but have not been tested against real opposition. The Type 99A inherits a Soviet carousel autoloader vulnerability, the same flaw that has caused Russian tank turrets to explosively separate in Ukraine. Without combat experience, the People's Liberation Army has not faced the practical consequences of this design choice. Their confidence in the tank's protection is theoretical rather than proven. Cost factors limit Type 99A deployment, creating a two-tier force structure where only elite units have modern equipment. This reduces training opportunities, limits overall force proficiency, and complicates operations that require coordination between units with very different capabilities. Defense Intelligence Agency assessments identify gaps between the People's Liberation Army and forces of powerful nations, not primarily in hardware but in operational experience and institutional knowledge. The Type 99A represents this gap perfectly. Competitive hardware, inadequate understanding of how to employ it. You can give soldiers advanced tanks. You cannot give them 46 years of combat experience they never had. The hardware is there, the knowledge is not. And until that gap closes through extensive realistic training, updated doctrine, and potentially combat experience, China's impressive-looking tank fleet represents underutilized potential rather than realized combat power. Don't forget to subscribe for more analysis on the gap between impressive hardware and actual operational capability. Thanks for watching.